How about that? Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. I know driving into Pittsburgh can be a challenge any weekday. So we do appreciate the time that you spent in the car this morning and come and joining us. This is a pretty interesting event. I am not going to sit here and talk about it because I have our Chief Technology Officer, Ed Kazemchak, who's going to come up and do the introduction. If you have any problems, need anything during the course of the day, please don't hesitate to ask me. My name is Brett Geibel. I'm the Director of Operations here at SDS. I'm just happy that you showed up and we're going to enjoy the day of education with us. So no further ado, here's Ed.
Thank you, Brett. And I also want to, thank you all for driving and braving 28 this morning and all the different ways there is to get into Pittsburgh. So first, I want to officially welcome you all to our military medical device event. Internally, we called this the Bat Doc event because that's what it's founded around. But we're going to be talking about a lot of different applications of military medical. Some of it will be device-based, some will be software-based, some will be process-based. But for us, because we're embedded systems nerds, we think of it all, everything as a device. So we decided to hold this event because we think that Pittsburgh is uniquely positioned to have an impact in military medical. We have world-class, research universities, and you'll be hearing from, Jan Berkow from the University of Pittsburgh. We also have, a robust user community here locally. Later on, after lunch, the keynote will be from Captain Jessica Ellis of the 911th, and Captain Ellis will be talking about how they use these systems day in, day out in their work. We also in Pittsburgh have a long history of medical device manufacturers here. Everything from little startups, developing their first product to Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies who have been building medical devices for decades. And so, I ask you, if you're part of that last group, to think about the devices that you're building. Think about, the devices that you're designing, what you're doing right now, and how those devices could be utilized in the medical theater in military use. Because, this is a wide open area. It's generally pretty well funded. And it's also a place where, your devices can make a difference helping those military personnel who are working with and supporting our service women and men who are keeping us safe. I don't want to be up here too long. You didn't come here to hear me talk. So I want to, the last thing I want to mention is I want to thank our partners at the PTC for helping us with this event, supporting us throughout the years. We've been 22 years in business, and we started that very first month by joining the PTC. It's been a long journey. They were down, I think you're down on 2nd Ave somewhere at that time, and we visited down there. And we've grown as they've grown. And I want to welcome Brian Kennedy to say a few words.
And thank you to the team here at SDS that put this event together. I'm just going to give you a couple kind of quick why words, why we think that this type of work is really important to Southwestern Pennsylvania. We're in the process at the Pittsburgh Technology Council of updating our strategic plan. And if you can't tell, Department of Defense is a key part of what we've been working on here for the last 3 years. So just give you a few quick statistics. In 2020, the Pittsburgh region was home to about $400 million worth of Department of Defense work. Does that sound like a lot? Bit long of you? $400 million, $500 million, not bad, right? Not bad. Since 2020, the region has doubled DoD funding every single year. And if you have children, you want to teach them about compounding growth. That means that we have $15 billion so far right now in 2025 with quite a few months left to go. Pittsburgh Technology Council members have actually increased prime contract awards by 55% over that 5-year period, and dollar awards by 3,500%. So it takes work like this to position this region to win. Some of you were with us. How many people here were with us yesterday at Vapor East? Oh, great. Great. So a few of you. Yeah. So if you weren't with us yesterday at Vapor East, where we opened a 30 seat co-working space for companies that are interested in pursuing phase 1, phase 2, and then taking that leap in commercializing phase 3 research. So if you are interested in learning about how you can be part of that co-working space, by the way, it's all expenses paid, and you're getting free technical assistance from Air Force funded organizations. We were also yesterday joined by the 171st and by the 911th. I didn't get to see Captain Ellis yesterday, so I'm looking forward to seeing her today. But I do just want to tell you that the Tech Council is here to support your success as you grow in this. And this is a really important mission. I think that we have an amazing agenda put together for you today. And so just want to thank the team again at SDS for letting us play a small role. Thanks.
So our first speaker this morning, our keynote speaker, is Jan Berkow. Personally, I haven't really known Jan all that long. And I don't want to say that I was shocked when he agreed to be our keynote speaker, but I was pleasantly surprised that he decided to participate with us. But after knowing him for at least as long as I have, I shouldn't have been surprised at all, because he is one of the most generous and genuine people that I've met here in this region. I would also like to say that if I looked up in Chat GPT, master of domain experience, I'm pretty sure that Jan's face would come up in that. He never ceases to amaze me with the information that he can share, whether it be on a personal or professional level. I'll stop gushing. Anyway, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Program Manager for Commercialization at the Center of Military Medicine Research at the University of Pittsburgh, Mr. Jan Berkow.
Okay, thank you, Brett. He's being very kind, and the reason he's gushing and providing all this general stuff is because I didn't give him a very good bio. So it's my fault, I apologize. By way of background, that's appropriate here, I actually had a spin out for 15 years as a co-founder, chief technology officer, and I also managed an SBIR portfolio for one of these job mills, if you will. And so I have a lot of experience. By way of quantity, they would put out about 80 to 90 SBIR proposals every 4 months by way of production line. So we have quite a bit of experience and understanding how to window. Anyway, so the topic I wanted to launch into, I didn't think there was, I wanted to provide a little bit more background in regard to the aspect about the topic of mass casualty response, and start with that and then lead into the SBIR topic that I was assigned, if you don't mind. So if you can begin with the next slide. So I think those that have read a number of the solicitations or read any of the control documents put out by the military, the mantra is always, future battlefields will entail large-scale combat operations, fought against near-peer adversaries and austere multi-domain environments. That's the mantra. That's the vision and that's already occurring in the Ukraine. These pictures are unmanned, or the aspects about how we're transporting casualties currently in the Ukraine. And so the goal here is, under that environment, under those conditions, how do we perform a mass casualty response to rapidly clear the battlefield and provide a highly coordinated combat casualty care continuum? And what I mean by that is that if you think about the primary issue, which is preventable death, which is primarily occurring due to hemorrhage from explosions or gunfire, think about it from this perspective. For every minute of delay to getting into a definitive care location means 11% increase in mortality risk. So that goes along with, as well, with rural casualty care. One of the areas that is also austere that has the same needs, not from a mass casualty, maybe from a FEMA mass casualty perspective, but from the need to have real-time or rapid response to be able to improve upon preventable death. So here are some vision statements from organizations such as the Modern Medical Vision, I guess, that was put out. Is this Futures Command? I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's all about autonomy. It's all about, closed loop control, unmanned ground, unmanned air, optimizing evacuation, trying to do rapid triage in order to maximize from an operational perspective return to duty, as well as discriminating those that are highly severely injured and putting them into the appropriate care facility to optimize their outcome. And again, working in a multi-domain environment in order to coordinate all that. So what does that mean in regard to what is the resource? What is the vision of how this translates into the actual technical components? So this is kind of a home creation of mine. But the primary point here is it's really a real-time treat to order mass casualty care enterprise, if you will. And it's all contingent upon the accuracy and the timeliness of the data. All of it. In order to be able to understand, for example, from an operational perspective, how do I figure out which casualties need actually care at the point of injury and too unstable in order to transport? That means I got to do more discriminatory or more complete triage in regard to injury severity and so forth, and what their needs are and the ability to transport them. From a standpoint of integrating the casualty with the drone and the transport, there's a document that was developed by NATO called the Safe Ride Standard, anticipating this integration between transport and casualty. And we know that if we take a casualty and we put them under too much G-forces and so on, the primary effect that it has on somebody that's unstable is lung diffusion capacity, inappropriate or inadequate perfusion to the lungs and inability to breathe, not the cardiovascular system and the hemodynamics, it's lung diffusion capacity. It's the primary. So evasive maneuvers, rapid takeoff and lift, is G-force. And flying at high altitudes and so on, we're not doing low and slow in mass casualty responses against near-peer casualties. We're doing evasive maneuvers. So I have a global ocular injury that is affected by high altitude or traumatic brain injuries and things like that. We need to understand what those are so we can put constraints, if possible, on that unmanned transport so we don't do additional harm to the casualty. All these things need to go into this enterprise. And from a standpoint of the field hospitals are now movable. So we want to figure out, and we don't even do this in the civilian space, we don't really understand what's in the queue in regard to the ER and the number of beds that are available. So we don't really understand how to prevent overcrowding. So how do we understand, per that mass casualty response, how to schedule the casualties transport, what's the appropriate disposition of the casualty in regard to the resources available, and how do I optimize utilization of resources, both staff and medical logistical things, be it drug, blood, hormone, whatever. How do I amass this and determine how the appropriate schedule utilize it in order to maximize my efficiency and utilization of resources, which they want to keep as lean as possible in order to focus on the mission. Okay, so you can get into the details of it, but this is what it's all about, is data. And it's all being done under care under fire, which is why backup and automation of the capture of data is so critical. Pretty good. Did I make that forceful enough? So how do we do all this? These are some of the key areas that are focused upon in this one DHA document is, areas that we really need, which is, again, improvement in resuscitative care, which is the primary reason for a cause of death at the battlefield. The need to improve the medical assessment, provider capacity by maximizing utilization of resources in order to handle incoming demand. And, you know, autonomous systems in general in order to be able to, I guess, act as a force multipliers. That's a term everybody uses in order to minimize the footprint of the medical staff. Please go ahead. So some more slides I kind of created. So here are some key components, again, if you will, emphasize a little bit more as to really what are the key components of an operational command under this scenario. So of course you have the command and control that really needs to manage all of this from the standpoint of the transport scheduling, the optimal disposition of the transported casualty, utilization, disposition of medical staff and resources, all needs to be done at that centralized command and control. But we need more effective and rapid triage and resuscitation capability on the front end to drive all of this. You know, we know now that it's all about personalized medicine. Where are you in the stage of the injury? What are your personal needs given your, you know, could you have complex forms of injuries and insults? So it needs to be specific to the patient, not these generalized, you know, physiology measures and so forth. Use of predictive algorithms in order to be able to understand what the personal needs of the individual. We're actually funded at the University of Pittsburgh to do a closed loop fluid resuscitation system is where I'm coming from that perspective. And then from the standpoint of the casualty care and movement, again, the integration of what is the requirement of the pod in order to be able to use it as a casevac, transport medical logistic in, transport casualty out. How do I figure out what the appropriate staging areas are and the queues within the staging areas to get it from one facility to the next, to get it the definitive care at goal 4, those kinds of things. So all of this needs to be done in real time in order to be responsive to this mass casualty response in order to maximize life and outcome. And so maybe I'm jumping on somebody else's cue cards or whatever, my apologies, but what we have found, what I was really excited about is when I learned about the doc, going to all these MHSRS meetings and seeing what they have developed, what a wonderful tool it is in regard to the being able to provide it as a platform for multiple uses. And the best part about it is the most challenging thing across the services is standardization. Getting it accepted by all of the services, so you're not doing, you know, one solution for the Army and one solution for the Marines. And having it as a standardized approach is wonderful. And so, you know, really thankful for the guys to having achieved this. They're the ones that worked out the communications and the communications pipe. They now, I believe they have the ability to use it as a regulatory approved device for monitoring various types of biosensors and so forth. So it serves as a wonderful platform for multiple uses, including managing and assigning a GPS location and a unique patient ID in order to maximize and facilitate patient transfer. So managing that patient record, having a unique ID, understanding where they're located in order to manage mass casualties out on the battlefield during the care continuum, you know, and across the care facilities as well, is critical in order to maximize the response. Go ahead. And so you probably already know some of this stuff, and I'm stealing somebody else's fire, but I just wanted to get into, if you go to the next slide, you know, some of the uses potentially. We ourselves, if you just jump to the next slide for a second, and I'll go back to this one. And, so we're developing a fluid resuscitation device, and it assumes that somebody is on a ventilator. Because we need to manage spontaneous breathing in order to get a good cardiac pulse rate. So we electromechanically integrated it with Thornhill Medical's ventilator in order to manage ventilation. But basically, it's a physiological closed loop control device that takes sensor data in, applies unique predictive analytics in order to identify whether the fluid, they're not stable, they're deprived in regard to fluid, or they're inadequately vasoconstricting, your primary compensatory mechanism, in order to maintain stability. So it really determines whether you need pharma or you need blood product in order to remain stable and get adequate oxygen delivered to your body. And so what we're envisioning, not the first version, but we're envisioning is ultimately to build it on top of BADDOC and to use it as a monitoring tool in order to take access of that biosensor or biosignal data stream, do our derived parameters from that, and then apply our predictive algorithms, and then drive our infusion pumps. The first version of this that we're doing development will require clinician authorization in order to get through the clinical pathway, or the regulatory pathway, but ultimately the vision is really, having something that actually stays with the patient during the care continuum, and even perhaps has feedback from the navigational unit on the transport mechanism. So you're anticipating the movement of that transport so that you can adjust your parameters to accommodate the stress that it entails. Could you go back to the previous slide? And so I just wanted to mention some of the other aspects about BADDOC that we're looking at it from the standpoint of triaging and incorporating those types of things to build upon it. Again, because it's JOMA standardized and accepted, it's a wonderful platform to build upon and enhance. That's the key benefit. They've solved the communications pipe. They solved the aspect about standardizing on a tool, the usability and aspects. It's a wonderful tool to build upon. And so, we're looking at it from the standpoint also, if you incorporate it in our little mini ICU, it could be the system that manages actually the more static patient record for patient data transfer purposes, which is very, very critical during a rapid paced care continuum. What interventions did you perform? What drugs did you use? What's the latest response of that patient in regard to the longitudinal care or the care continuum the patient's been under for the care program? Having all that available, and in the past, the challenges of actually trying to create the electronic data record, the PC3 card or DD 1380, whatever you want to call it, has never been accurately or completely collected. So the trauma registry has always been lean in regard to being able to use data from the battlefield because of it. And then of course, active management during en route care. So if the devices go down and you have something that works manually, that's better than nothing. And this provides a foundation that can go either way, autonomous or manually. So it's a wonderful solution. Anyway, that's the end of the introduction that I wanted to show in regard to need and connectivity to the BADDOC platform. Does that make sense? Okay. I shouldn't say this, we've flown kids around Pittsburgh in a bench level design and having an uncontrolled hemorrhage model. So we've done all that. And now we're in the phase where we're actually funded in order to develop the final prototype. And we'll have it tested by the 59th Air Force Wing, probably with an indication that's on a long duration fixed wing plane or in a field hospital, emergency room kind of field hospital environment. That's our starting point, it's our starting indication.
Awesome.
It's from the clinical pathway or regulatory pathway to go. So then again, it requires user authorization in order to administer an intervention. So that's currently under development. And the biggest issue, I think, is really, how you seamlessly incorporate that front end that says, when do I put this resuscitation solution on? And what other considerations do I use in regard to form of blood product and so on, depending upon who they are and what form of shock that they're in, because this would address all forms of shock. Okay, so that's what, and so we're trying to work on trying to make it seamless. We're thinking that a clinical decision support thing system. Front end probably would be 2.0, but right now it's manually done by an EMS clinician or whatever in order to ascertain or discriminate who they are. Yes, sir.
Okay, somebody asked a question. Could you repeat the question for us so the people online could hear us as well? They couldn't hear the question.
Oh, they couldn't see the question. Okay, so the question was, what stage are we in regard to the development of our product, our fluid resuscitation product? Sorry. Thank you. Any other question? Or already told you more than I know. Okay. All right. So I'll go on to the SBIR stuff. Oh, here's a couple pictures of what we envision using it. So initially, some sort of fixed wing, a long duration flight type of thing where we can actually manage multiple casualties at the same time. And eventually, if we could get it into, closed loop form for transport or near point of injury would be probably 4.0 or 5.0 even. So we don't need to worry about initial authorization. The ability of a buddy aid to be able to be used in point of injury. Go ahead. So this is the SBIR program, and as I indicated, I was a portfolio manager for medical devices for a company up in called Triton Systems up in Massachusetts, and so I had all the medical devices, and I had a pretty big portfolio. Learned a lot. But the biggest challenges is trying to get it into commercialization and get over this, get into the abyss of trying to go past phase 2. But by law, there's a certain percentage of budget that has to go into SBIRs. I think that the amount of money has changed, or the amount of allocation has changed. I think it's up to 3.4% now. I'm not sure. But it's for organizations over $100 million in research, or budgets rather. Go ahead, please. And they're conducted or constructed, if you're not familiar, in 3 phases. Organization-specific kind of delineation regarding the amount of time allowed in each of these phases and how much budget is allowed. It seems to differ. But what percentage has to be done by the SBIR versus what can be done by an academic or a nonprofit that is working with you is always the same for all SBIRs. And then it also changes, that complexion changes when we get into phase 2. Phase 3, which is really how to get more towards the acquisition phase and get it commercialized, requires oftentimes not just matching funds, but actually the ear and the participation of the acquisition manager from that portfolio. So you actually know it's meeting the medical need. Many times topics will come out from individuals, but there's no formal requirement defined. So unless you actually have the ear and understanding of what that requirement is at this particular point in time, there's no home for it. Nobody's going to purchase it. So you need to be working that channel too once you start to get within your phase 2 in order to get it through the military. I'm really addressing DoD because that's really all I know. I don't know NIH and NFS, so my apologies. That's a little bit of a different beast, but anyway. And then, STTR, different percentage of work, and actually the PI can be performed by the nonprofit. In this instance, as opposed to an SBIR, where the PI needs to be actually employed by the small company. So, go ahead, please. So some rules in regard to who constitutes an employee and what is an SBIR. You can read it for yourself, but I think these are easily read, or these are all standard types of requirements and so on. The challenges come when an academic organization that wants to utilize funding, since all of ours has disappeared, becomes challenging if you want to maintain your job. But you got to be 51% employed by the small business to go after these and actually start to be up. So it's kind of hard to do both. But anyway, so that's some of the requirements you have to think about regarding eligibility. Next slide, please. And so here is, I think Joni Ernst was leading the charge in regard to some of the discussions about changes in SBIRs and so on. And it's called the Innovate Act, is the acronym up above. And here are the primary changes, I believe. They want to increase the pool of entrants by adding a new line of phase ones, which is smaller, requires less to get into it in regard to the proposal. So it's not so much focused on the proposal and those that have managed the proposal process anymore. It's really just an award to get your feet wet and learn about all these new entrants in order that have really compelling technology. So that's one thing that's changing. There's the valley of death concern in regard to what happens after phase twos. They want to greatly increase that phase two. I read up to $30 million potentially to add to post phase two efforts in order to get it commercialized. How that's going to be done, I don't know. Again, if there's no requirement and so on in regard to making that happen, and you don't have a formal med-seated requirement document created, I don't know who's going to buy it without going that step, but this is really one of the changes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we're actually working with the committee staff in Joni Ernst's office on this particular bill. If any of you have concerns or questions about it, they have asked us for feedback. Our companies have provided a whole lot of feedback about some of the things.
Mr. Kenny was indicating that he was then involved and requested to provide feedback to Joni Ernst's committee, which is wonderful to hear, to get that local feedback incorporated into the program. That's great. And again, you're not getting those funds for free. You do have to have matching commercial support in order to be able to get those funds. So it's not just going to the military and trying to strike up a cooperative agreement with your sponsor or technical point of contact. It's much more than that in regard to acquisition. Go ahead, please. And then two other changes for the job mills, like the one I used to work for, that are receiving the concern is 25 companies are receiving 18%, the majority of or a good portion of the funding. And so they want to put a lifetime cap on the amount of funding, or make sure that you have an appropriate ratio of external funding beyond the military that demonstrates that you're really focusing on commercialization in order to go beyond this point. And so the ratio of your funding resources really needs to go beyond just DoD grants. And then this other aspect about, you commercialize something and who's actually investing in and commercializing or assigning the patent rights to it. If it's a Chinese company or a Russian company, the military wants to be concerned about it because they're the ones that supported the original development in the first place. So they want to incorporate a fallback option to take back that technology or that grant if indeed your focus is really to commercialize it regardless of who it is that you're partnering with. And so that's a big security risk issue that's really getting more and more prominent. And then these things are very clear in regard to how often that these announcements come out, STTR, SBIR. The primary thing to remember is when the announcement comes back or comes out in the street before it's formally posted, you can actually still, I believe, contact the technical point of contact and ask informal questions without having them broadcast in writing to all your competitors. Now, they're not allowed to answer questions to give you competitive advantage, but you can ask more specifics in regard to, types of things you're looking for, what verification of what the problem is or the need, those kinds of things. But you're really espousing information and trying to get confirmation or clarity, to give you competitive advantage. That's sure. But they're not, they're strictly trained not to be able to provide too much. Oftentimes you can't even contact who the person is and find out who that organization is. Determining who the TPOC actually is and what organization they come from oftentimes will tell you the context of what that need is in the first place if you investigate heavily. And then the last slide, I don't know what my timing is because I haven't been looking, but so some areas of focus, and I just kind of grabbed these ideas. I didn't look at one of the latest solicitations, but typically when you're, what I always get dinged upon is you really understand the problem, you know, and if you don't have the subject matter experts on your team to fully understand the problem, but there really is no way that you really fully grasp what the need is in regard to the market. And so having subject matter experts, especially military clinicians who understand point of care, standards of care needs, and understand really what current practices are and their deficiencies is pretty critical. Or otherwise you're just blowing smoke. And then having a really sound model of what maybe it's an injury model or something like that that you're focusing on, or a specific problem, using standard models and having validation of them either locally with some preliminary data or having papers that reference them from pretty credible individuals, as well as clinicians that really understand the utility of what you're offering and can vouch for the value on your team really is important. So it's not just a researcher. You really need to have a practitioner, a clinician, somebody that can aid in identifying what that value is. Oftentimes too is the military is always concerned, even more so now, about commercialization. So having a reasonable go-to-market plan is pretty critical, and knowing regulatory pathways, or at least the preliminary aspects about it. I mean, you're nowhere near a pre-IND or pre-sub or anything like that at this particular point in time, but you certainly need to have an understanding as to what your market is. And by the same coin, the military market is relatively small. So you don't have an idea of really what the sustainability is in order to get this ROI and make sure that, you can actually commercialize it, because the military wants you to commercialize it in order to sustain it, then, it's a waste of time for them and it's a wasted investment. So you really need to understand what that corresponding civilian market need is. And by the same token, there is no wartime utility or application where you can identify a cohort out in the field in order to conduct your clinical pathway. So you have an excuse built in order to find an adequate cohort for your clinical trials to find an appropriate or equivalent civilian utility or application to be able to test your technology. This is providing you an excuse in regard to, what is the appropriate indication, the regulatory pathway, and getting end user feedback. Okay, so that's pretty important to think that through, as well as anyway, pretty self-explanatory. That's pretty much my last slide. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a process by which you can be involved in the SBIR determination process before it's released? Is it common for people to help
Craft ideas?
help craft the ideas?
Yes. Oftentimes, I guess the way I heard it is that the question is can you get involved in actually helping to craft or form SBIR topics? I think if you're already collaborating with individuals who are looking for ideas, because oftentimes in their area that they have been working, they're tasked as a side job to come up with SBIR topics, and they don't exactly already know what they are. So you can offer some ideas in the pre-formulation before they're posted or already established, well before this occurs. So you're probably 2 cycles out in order to kind of aid in coming up with brainstorming ideas. But I'll give you a great idea, a great example. There was an example of up in the mountains in the wintertime in Afghanistan. I believe they had a a trauma patient, somebody with that had I think their leg was extreme, they had a tourniquet on their leg and the leg was really extremely bleeding, so they're under hemorrhage. And what they found out is as they placed this casualty in the snow up in the mountains, the cold induced, via the thermal regulation, induced lower metabolic needs in regard to the blood supply and so forth. And actually, even though the tourniquet wasn't released, and if you leave a tourniquet on somebody for a long period of time, there's no blood flow, the limb's going to die. So you're supposed to periodically reduce the stress on the tourniquet, allow some minimal blood flow, and then tighten it again in order to control blood. But they found out that by leaving this person up in the cold, the minimal need for blood flow or perfusion really allowed this person to preserve their limb without actually tightening and loosening the tourniquet. Very strange. So it was just, an anecdotal or, happenstance experience that created this topic. Could you create a mobile system that enable you to, thermally induce some lower metabolic needs so you can preserve the limb? Yes, sir.
I have a question about, so if I'm starting a company and I don't have a large team, I have a lot of contacts, but not only. How much on my consumer application can represent if they're willing and interested in being part of the team, but they're not actually employed? How do you kind of navigate that question? You have to have all employees that are there.
I don't believe you do. Your PI in the SBIR area does, STTR does not, of course. In regard to the composition of your team, it's the percentage of work that's actually performed that has to be performed by the team. So if you look back at the percentages, you'll see that certain number of them have to be fully employed in order to meet that percentage. But I also believe in talking to like a NIH representative that fee for service stuff activity for subcontractors is also included as part of work done by the SBIR. So I think you have to look at that.
We've also looked myself to subcontract to some academic work.
Yeah, they don't have to. Yes, sir.
I have some input to that because I've done a lot of stuff. The key, and it depends on how the contractor is. The key is in how you identify those other people as either consultants or subcontractors. If they're consultants, a fee for service type of situation, treated like directly as if they're an employee of the company. If you listen to subcontracting, it's a team member, separate company, and then you get into the whole of it. Just read the contract carefully and categorize those people carefully to make sure you're getting the proper credit for those are your employees.
Yeah. So manipulating. It's going to be easier for you. Any other questions? Okay.
Right, since we're talking, I just want to, this is a great slide. Anybody's looking to get into this, you touched on some very important points that often get overlooked, which is that commercialization part and how transition to operational use in the military is always everybody's first goal, but it's really just the first step in your commercialization roadmap. And it's harder than you think because your own PPOP isn't going to be your champion in bringing your technology into operational use elsewhere in the military. Now, if their particular unit can't use it, and very often that's the case, you have to be the one to go out and find the other opportunities. You have to develop a relationship with an important team member. They often have somebody who's done that before. Maybe they're retired out of a certain agency that can use their technology. That's a hugely important slide there. That really has nothing to do with the technology you're developing, and everything to do with how to turn into a product. That value of depth is very real, and very hard to close.
And very harsh in regard to the actual reviewers who scrutinize these things. And if you hadn't been through the process before, that's one of the first starts.
Now, only 6% of companies that get an SBIR ever go on and get contract work for an SBIR. You don't start with commercialization, you'll just be government funded grant work.
It's a pretty low success rate for venture funded areas. A great program.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, is there pressure on you talked earlier about a lot of people are retreating to the SBIR program because of other funding pressures budget being frozen and such. When you, other programs being frozen, does that affect the overall percentage of the SBIR money as well? Is that also getting affected?
No, it's interesting. The question is how is the current administrative funding strategy affecting SBIRs versus other research funding? What we're finding at Pitt is, the overall theme seems to be commercialize everything. You know, so put everything in the commercial hands of small businesses and so on. And so we see research associated with the academic organization tab, or you know, those departments that are doing research in the military, or their organizations are getting rid of all their contractors and really getting rid of many of their programs. I have a drug that focuses on musculoskeletal injury. We won a proposal to get it through preclinical testing after the IND and everything. We're in the process of negotiating that contract, and the contract is full, nearly $4 million. So, you know, and where are we going to get funding in order to make up that gap? Yeah. There isn't any, because most of the skeletal doesn't have a portfolio anymore. And SBIRs don't seem to have a lot of medical profits lately. If you've been looking at any of the profits that are coming up. So I don't know where it's going, but they do seem to be increasing the percentage of your budget, you know, like from 3.2 to 3.4 or whatever it is. So it doesn't seem to be affecting SBIRs, but again, I don't know what they're using SBIRs for. This hasn't come out yet until September next round. So we don't know how this is going to be realized. All new. Stay tuned. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you having me.
Pretty good. Yes, sir.
Question, your slide deck is wonderful. Is there a chance to get a copy?
I can share that with you. You're welcome. You have a question? Oh, you want the slide deck? We're going to take a short break. Feel free to grab refreshments if you need some. Use the restroom if you need to. And we'll convene here. Just give me about 5 minutes.
So that's what I would probably do. Taking that risk out. It's like a hot light. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.